which, well, I didn't do it, but it was done. But where you spray your hair blue, and then you go and sit in the student union bar, and you wait for people to come and ask you, why is your hair blue? Which offers the perfect opportunity to explain the atoning death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Now, it was activities like that which just, I just didn't want to be part of them, really. And yet I found a real home in this student community action group, and I really loved it. And of course, I'm being a bit harsh, you know, on that. There were a couple of anecdotes. They weren't bad people at all, and they were doing their best in loads and loads of ways. But it was a bit of the tip at the time, because they weren't interested in social issues, really. That wasn't really on the agenda in any of the meetings or really being talked about. And I guess what happened in me personally was that I'd like to say I found a kind of deeper form of faith. I'd like to say that, you know, my faith was really emphasised and expressed through the student community action. But to be honest, my faith kind of withered, really, if I'm honest. I actually was elected at the end of university to be like one of these, you know, vice presidents of the union. You know, it's for a year job. You know, you work for the student union, and I was running the student community action group. That was my full-time job. And when I did some research on that student community action group, it had been started in 1961. And guess which institution had started it? Yeah, it was the Christian Union. You know, the Christian Union had started this student community action group, and yet by the time I was there, 30 years later, it was completely separate, and they operated in completely separate worlds. And that just really, really got me thinking, because that split was occurring in my own life as well. You know, that my action was becoming separated from my faith. And when I graduated, sorry to be so autobiographical, but it just sort of explains where I'm coming from a bit. But after university, I lived in a house in South London with some mates, and it was a really good time, and it was a lot of partying and stuff. As I said, my faith was really, really weak. And then I got a call from a church that I've been involved in doing, running voluntary work on, and it's the church is St Jude's and St Paul's that you might know, Mildmay. So just in Islington, but close to the Hackney border. Near Dalston, isn't it? It's just down the road from here. And they did a holiday club that I've been involved in for many years in Islington. And basically, I'd still been involved in this holiday club, and I got asked, the church on the Marquis estate, which is an estate on Essex Road, they basically had I'd known the estate well, I'd done a lot of voluntary work on it, and they basically, the church had bought an old wine bar on this estate, and they had bought this wine bar, and it had a manager's flat above it, and they bought it as their church community centre, and they had a manager's flat above it, and they asked me if I wanted to move in, because they didn't know anyone else who they thought might be interested, partly because I was working on Mare Street, so I was working in a large hostel on Mare Street. Some of you might know 146 Mare Street. It's a big hostel for homeless people, and I was working there at the time. So it really worked well for me. The reason I tell you all that is because it was that journey for me. I felt like God really threw a sort of gauntlet down to me. It was this offer, will you move on to this flat and to this estate? And if I'm honest, that estate, the Marquis estate at the time, this was the mid-90s, I'm not exaggerating to say it was probably one of the scariest places I knew of at the time, really, because I knew it through doing voluntary work there. And it was like this offer, well, you know, would you move in to this flat and live there? And it was, I mark it at a second point, so I became a Christian when I was 16, but this was a really critical point where I did decide to move there. I left this house with my mates down in South London, and I went on a real journey where my faith and my action kind of came back together. And a friend of ours, Corin Pilling, a really good mate of mine, lent me loads of books at the time, all about Christian activists. and stuff that was theological and Christian, about Christian social action, connecting these things up. And I think that's just a real sort of thread for me about, I just put this model up, because, you know, about how faith can lead to action, but actions can remain rooted in faith. And I really sort of experienced so much of a discovery of so much in the Bible about how, you know, faith needs to be seen in action. A real kind of reconnection of these two things. And that split between these two that had occurred in my own life and that I'd seen in organisations is a real sort of thread in the work I've done since. I mean, I think the trouble is when these things get split up, apart, I think there's a lot of problems. I think faith without action can often be sort of disengaged from the world around it. It can become irrelevant. You know, people can accuse the church of hypocrisy when they don't see it doing things. When it's the world of words and singing, or of words and talk. But actually, you know, where's the action? And I think there's a lot of critique in the Bible about sort of religion that becomes meaningless when it's not connected to being put into action. But equally, action itself, you know, needs kind of roots, it needs nourishment. And so many organisations, like virtually all the homeless organisations in London, have started out from churches. So I used to work for Centrepoint, who many of you may know, really well-known youth charity. It was started by a church in Soho in the 60s. And again, that split really occurs because now it's really nothing to do with the church anymore. And I think that this kind of connectivity between these two things, you know, how faith works in action, it's a real sort of central plank, really, of sort of what I want to talk about and what we're going to explore. Because I think the themes of like resistance and renewal are both kind of a bit like we talked about this morning about hope and sanctuary. I think two really important kind of ingredients in keeping faith alive and active and connected to action. So just briefly about the West London Mission. We had this church. This is a church near Bond Street where I'm based for work, and there's another church in King's Cross, which is part of the West London Mission. And then basically we run these services for homeless people and marginalised people. So there's a day centre. We coordinate, like you're involved in the Hackney Winter Shelter, aren't you? And we coordinate the Westminster version of that. And we run a hostel for men coming out of prison and a home for men with alcohol problems. Do a lot of work with homeless people coming out of the forces. So that's a kind of a range of the work we do. And again, it's a real joy for me to be involved in work where, you know, the church has birthed a whole load of action that it's involved in. I think the real challenge in my role is keeping these two connected, keeping them flowing together rather than that sort of pull apart that I was talking about. But I'll just tell you about a guy. This is Kevin. And Kevin was a guy, maybe, I mean, someone was talking earlier about walking down Mare Street, seeing a lot of homeless guys. And Kevin, you know, would be a sort of archetype of someone at the very chaotic end of homelessness. Someone who has been an alcoholic since a very young age, and his life has really descended into real chaos. And when we started working with him, he was like eating out of dustbins. And although it's horrible to say, you know, almost living a kind of almost animal-like existence in a way, with no concept of hope, certainly no concept of sanctuary, no concept of planting anything for tomorrow. It's just hour to hour, day by day, and of course everything trashed in terms of relationships, in terms of health, in terms of mental well-being. You know, someone whose problems have kind of, their crusts of problems have built up on someone like Kevin. and it's an incredibly hard way back. But Kevin moved into a place called The Haven, which we run in Finsbury Park, which is a care home for men with alcohol addiction. And we have to take a photo of them when they're coming, because a lot of them have alcohol-induced dementia. So they get lost, they forget where they are, they turn up in libraries and police stations, and they have to phone in, and we have to identify who they are. But this is Kevin, this is him 6 weeks after moving in. There's some obvious changes. I mean, I know a lot of the people in this room have a lot of facial hair. Kevin's got less. He's less hackney now. I think behind the scenes, what that photo, that 6 weeks, shows, there's the superficial stuff about how he looks. I can tell you the smell's greatly enhanced as well through washing and being in a safe place. But it's like the crust of issues that is built up just begins to get chipped away. And as a Christian organisation, not just that someone looks better or is in better health, but that image of God that's implanted on every single person that has become so mired and so, as I say, encrusted and so covered over, actually begins to be revealed, and restoration, renewal can take place. And a real joy in people like Kevin is seeing people get back in touch with their families, because it's so deep. The levels of pain are so deep. There's so many children's birthdays forgotten, so many arguments, fights, domestic violence that needs to be acknowledged. There's so much pain that lies behind each person who ends up on the street. And it's a real privilege to be able to see some of these things change. We're just going to talk in a minute about some of the reasons why these things happen. But some of you might know, this is one of these really flash gentlemen's clubs in West End, Portman Square. It's called a place called Home House. Do you know? Very nice it is. Basically, this was a few Christmases ago, a businessman had a lunch booked here. It's just around the corner from where we work. And he had a real big lunch book for 50 of his work clients. And he had about 20 people flying in from New York. And it was just before Christmas, and there was loads of snow that had fallen. And basically, the flight from New York couldn't come in. It was cancelled. And basically, he wanted to cancel the meal. So he got his PA to phone up this club and say to them, basically, we've got to cancel the meal, and we're going to look to rearrange it in the new year. And the club said, well, you can cancel it, but you're going to have to pay for it because it's too close to the event. And this businessman really was very, very angry at that, wasn't used to paying for anything he didn't get. And he said to the club, if you charge me, I'm going to bring 50 homeless people along to eat the meal I paid for. And basically they said to him, oh, you can't do that, we've got a dress code, and we don't let in anyone who's drunk. And he got his lawyer to write back to them, and he said, look, if I come in jeans, I don't know what the dress code is. And he said, if you didn't let in drunk people, you won't let in half the members. And that's when he phoned us up. And we basically run another institution just up the road, very similar. You get a meal and social activities, meet up with people, but for a slightly different client group. And we jumped at the chance. We had absolutely no problem in rustling up the required clientele, and it was just fantastic. And I just share it with you. It's such a funny event. And of course, this businessman, the funny thing was, he wasn't doing it out of good motives at all. He just doing it to spite the club. So when we turned up, he was there, he was talking to the staff there. He was saying, he was really aggressive, this guy. And he was saying stuff, treat these people like effing kings. Kings. I was telling him to calm down. And our guys walked in, and we took 10 people from our day centre, which is just up the road, and 10 people from that place Kevin lives in, the Haven. And it was so funny because they, of course, when they came in, they'd have their cakes taken. you know, off their backs. And some of our guys are really playing up to it. And they're going, "Don't mind if I do." You know? Be careful with that. That is my favourite coat. And, it was a real lovely moment. And the reason for saying it, these are three of the guys from where Kevin lives. And the staff went out and got them you know, jackets from local charity shops and stuff. But I love this picture so much because if you contrast it with that one of Kevin earlier, there's real hope and dignity, and you know, that thing of people standing up straight rather than shuffling along. And it's a real picture of that hope Alexandra was talking about this morning, but also of renewal and of change and transformation. And you know, it was just one little anecdote. It was a bit like a parable, really. I said to the businessman, "This is like a parable, isn't it?" He didn't know what I was going on about. But I just want to ask a question to throw out there, really, just to think about. Just talk with the person next to you. What are some of the reasons why someone becomes homeless? And the reason I think about this, I'm not talking about homelessness, but because homelessness sums up so many problems in the city. It's not a standalone issue. It brings together so many issues that we're going to talk about resistance to. Just have a chat with the neighbour for a couple of minutes. What are the ingredients? Why are the reasons people become homeless?